there has to be something else. They become a certain image so that we could see them as they are. My name is Tim Moon, and I live in Austin, Texas, and I'm a teacher and a first-time novelist. And the book is called Tomato Fields, and I wrote it over the last 10 years. And my inspiration was to use fiction as a means of winning people and drawing people to this topic of cryptids and Bigfoot in a way that maybe nonfiction isn't able to do through storytelling and character development and emotional engagement. I heard a quote once that facts tell, but stories sell. And so I was just hoping maybe making this more accessible to people who may not otherwise be interested. And that's kind of what drove me to write the book. But it took a long time because I've never written a novel and I had a lot to learn. And then my brother had an experience that I can go into more detail where he had a pretty significant Bigfoot encounter that he told me about. That I didn't know he'd ever had. That was pretty amazing. It was a 5-star encounter. And that kind of pushed me off the cliff and got me writing. And I based a lot of it around the area where he lives, which I can explain further as well.
Tell me about your brother's encounter that then you drew from to put this fictional book together.
My brother bought some property in Mason County. And he's a contractor. He bought it in the 90s, and it's just up above the Hood Canal Hook. And he was going to subdivide it and build homes there, which he has since done. And he worked in Seattle, though, during the week and just came out on the weekends. And on a Friday evening, he went out to work on he had the lights. His lights on the back of his truck were causing him a problem. So he was out there fixing that. And he smelled a really bad smell, and he couldn't figure out what that was. He thought maybe a skunk or a dead animal or something. So he started looking around to see if he could find it. And just up to his left, up on the road, about 70 yards, he saw this animal standing there. It was about 9.5 to 10 feet tall, based on where its head came to the telephone pole, and he just was shocked. It was massive. It was 4 or 5 feet wide and 9.5 feet tall. And he didn't know what to do. And as soon as they recognized that they saw each other, the animal started screaming at him. I'm sure you've heard those screams on video, but they're very loud and they kind of vibrate through you and they last forever and they change in tone and pitch. It's pretty scary. And he just freaked out. He thought he was not going to be long for this world. And he ran back toward his house, got inside and grabbed his shotgun and looked back out the window. And the animal stopped screaming, looked at the house for a second, and then turned and walked right back into the woods and took off back down in the direction it had come from. But he was scared. He was pretty scared. He'd never seen anything like that. And he said he didn't tell anybody for a long time because he didn't want people to laugh at him. And so when I asked him, we were doing some work for my uncle about 10 years ago. And I asked him if he'd ever seen anything like that. I think a program or something came on TV about mysteries or something. And so I asked him, what's the strangest thing he ever saw? And he told me that story, and I just couldn't believe it. It's not every day you hear a story like that, especially from someone you know. So I grilled him a lot with questions because I had been researching a lot on the subject. I've been interested in the subject since I watched the Legend of Boggy Creek movie as a child. And recently I had just been studying it a lot and reading as many stories as possible up to that point of when he told me this story. So it really kind of shocked me that my own brother had this and I didn't even know. So that kind of got me thinking, and I just said, well, I'm going to go ahead and start writing. And I used his house as kind of the epicenter and then wrote it around that. And the reason it's called tomato fields is he believes that the animals, they used to dump sewage just over the ridge and down the hill from his house. And it just, because of the seeds that were in it from vegetables and the like, it grew a lot of vegetables, and there was vegetables all over the place. And Joe just kind of got to calling it the tomato fields because there was a lot of tomatoes. And then he said that would also, and when I started writing the book, he said that would be a good name for a book. And it just kind of stuck. So he thinks the animal was heading back up the ridge and down the hill toward that area. So we just use his house and the tomato fields, and it becomes kind of the epicenter of all of the adventure. And it just has worked out that way. And I think it's a pretty good story. I'm getting some good reviews. So, but that's how it happened. That's what inspired it.
Did he ever see this creature again?
No, he did. He did smell it once and heard cracking in the woods above his house. So he got his shotgun again and started going up the hill, and just to see. I don't know why I wouldn't have done it if I was him, but then he saw the branches broken, like something had grabbed them, pretty significant sized branches, and pulled them backwards as they pulled themselves up the hill. They were just snapped, and he looked, and that scared him, and so he turned around and went back to the house. And he has heard stories from other people since of having encounters in that area. There's a lot of wilderness there. So, and one of the people who used to live in the house, he ran into a guy who used to live in the house a while after this. And that guy mentioned to him, have you seen your visitor? Something like that. And Joe didn't really completely know what he was saying, so he didn't say anything, but he wonders now if the previous owner was aware of it.
In researching this book, what were your sources? Where did you kind of go for information to put in the book?
Well, I listen to a lot of podcasts and read a lot of stories online, and so that's predominantly what I did in terms of content. I had already done enough to write the book without doing that, but I listen to them all the time. I just don't ever get tired of it. And as a historian, because I'm a teacher and a history person, and as a historian, I kind of look at it as historical documents, because these are often written down. They're often oral documents, which are an important part of history. And I think that if you look at almost every continent, many different languages, many different ethnic groups, many different religions, many different cultures, and yet they're largely describing the same thing. and none of them know each other. These have gone back for 10,000 years. So none of them know each other. And any other subject that historians could draw that much documentation for, they would jump on it. But for some reason, Bigfoot and cryptids and stuff, they look down on. But this is really good information, and it demonstrates that there's some fire that goes along with this smoke. These things are not a figment of someone's imagination. We may not completely know what they are, but they do exist. And so but like I said, I've been collecting stories and reading books and watching and listening to podcasts for a long time on this. There's one or two that I probably listen to more. I don't know if you want me to mention that, but that helped a lot. And what I've found by listening to those stories is that it's often the ones that there's a lot of irony to, that seem to make the most, that seem to mean the most to me and seem to be the most realistic, where people just do things under pressure when they're, accosted by something so crazy that they never anticipated seeing. And they do crazy stuff. And that's typically what people do under stressful situations. So I like those. And I just tried to use my creativity and imagination. I never used one story I all made up all new stories, but I made them up around possibilities based on what I had learned from reading and studying and listening to hundreds and thousands of them.
What do you think these creatures are, and where do you think they're from?
If I had to put money on it, and I'm glad I don't because I'm not certain, but I think there must be some type of extraterrestrial connection. And the reason I think that is because they don't move like things move on this earth. Even the fastest cheetahs and the strongest elephants, they still don't defy physics. They still do things that they're pretty predictable. Um, but these things can climb faster than it seems human possible. They run extremely fast. They jump extremely high. They move funny. Their legs move funny. Their arms are really long. They look a little like gorillas, but not really. And they look a little like human, but not. I mean, they're just seem to be out of this world. And I personally believe, based on a lot of stuff I've studied on that side of it too, that there are things visiting this planet and have been for a long time. And there's probably been other cultures that have been destroyed by earthquakes or floods or other catastrophes. There's things underwater, deeply underwater, that just aren't explainable, that were clearly built by human hands. And so I think that we've probably been visited a long time, not just recently, as some of the news reports tend to point out, but I think it's been happening for a long time. And it's very possible that species have been brought here or left here. And I just wonder if that's not the explanation. But I don't, like I said, I only am guessing. I don't have a solid answer to that. But if I had to bet money on it, that's probably the direction I would go.
Well, you've probably heard the correlation between a lot of people seeing orbs and these things, kind of
Yep.
like just disappearing into a light form rather than being
Yep.
solid.
Yep.
How much did you explore that?
That did not get explored too much in the book. One of my goals for the book, because I don't have a big ideology on this. I don't have to be right on what I think about Bigfoot. For me, the mystery is okay. And I wanted to write it so that people who had maybe more the paranormal side, or people who had the flesh and blood, believe that, whatever side they believe, there would be a place that they could rest in that and not feel like I was pretending I knew it all. Because I don't know it all, and I don't understand. There's just things I don't understand about it. But so this book, I didn't go that direction yet. But the sequel, I'm looking very seriously about going the portal connection and the lights connection. Um, and that's right now in the research and development part. I'm writing some, but I'm doing a lot of research too. So, because I think that's a really important part as well. And I do think that occurs. And I do think that science today is making things that we would have considered paranormal because we didn't understand it actually possible. And it's not making it possible, but it's discovering that it's possible. And so I want to examine that and do it in connection with this creature and other types of creatures.
Do you talk to people that had encounters?
Whenever I hear someone has had an encounter, I talk to them. Okay. I ask questions a lot anytime I run into a hunter or someone in the woods who spends any time at all in the woods, I ask them the simple question, well, what's the strangest thing you ever saw out there? And if they say nothing, or a squirrel hanging upside down a tree, I just ignore it. I just don't go to it because I don't want to be laughed at or something like that. But I probe to find out if they've had those experiences. And if someone mentions something that gets my interest, I will probe and ask them to. And occasionally someone tells me that they did have an encounter, and I'm happy to listen to the story.
So tell me, share some of those that you've been told.
I've had hunters tell me one interesting one in Idaho. a guy told me that his buddy was a forest ranger in Idaho, and this would have been in the 80s and 90s. And was out, he was out in the mountains, and I think he was looking or searching for something. So he was going to be out overnight, and he bedded down on a ridge, and he heard footsteps of something that was going off to his out in front of him and then down the hill a little bit. I think it was going to a stream or water, and then it screamed. And he didn't think it saw him or heard him. He had his gun if he needed it, but it freaked him out. But he just stayed still, and then eventually it left. And then the next day he identified some sign. I think it was footprints. That's one I've heard from talking to someone. A friend of mine who was my uncle's nurse was driving a car in Florida. She lived in Florida for a while, and she was driving to work one day. She worked at the military base, and she saw a big orange one. They call them, what is it, swamp apes down there. And it was crossing the road right in front of her. And she just freaked out. And when she found out I was interested in that, she told me about that story. And so those are examples. And she was pretty scared, but everybody laughed at her. No one believed it. So she was happy to talk to someone who believed it. And then my brother's story, those right now coming immediately to mind, those are the most memorable ones for me.
Have you ever gone out yourself to try to see or to do any research on your own in the woods?
I've done a little bit. I've done a little bit of hunting, and was out in the Idaho area, there's a lot of wilderness out there, hunting elk and deer. Earlier, after college, once I moved west, there wasn't as much opportunity for that. And I have gone out with my brother in the area that we've discussed looking for things, and we found some interesting signs, some broken branches that were real high, some scat that was kind of strange, some footprints that had the right distance between them to show a pretty large stride. The animal, whoever left the footprints, had a pretty large stride. But it was all circumstantial. It wasn't something I would have tried to use as absolute proof that we found an area that a Bigfoot had been in. But I think it probably was. There was enough circumstantial evidence that I think it's reasonable that it was. It was right off of a highway on a logging road, and it crossed the logging road. It was a deer trail that crossed the logging road, that crossed the highway from one side of the logging road to the other. And I got to thinking, I wonder if that, because the branch was broken about 12 feet up, and it was just broken. And it couldn't have been broken by snowfall, because there hardly snows there. It's not that windy. So, but it was just grabbed and broken, like something grabbed it and just twisted and broke it down. And it was about a 6-inch tree. And it almost looked like a marker. And it just made me wonder if that was not a marker for other creatures to let them know this was a deer crossing, because I know they hunt a lot of deer. So that's just something I thought about. I couldn't prove that. I am in the area that I'm researching now, which is in Texas. I know some friends who are going to take me out. They're pretty serious about this, and they go to some scary places. And they invited me to come with them if I can work that in the schedule when they're going, and I'm going to go. And they have had some encounters and some experiences that I think would be very interesting, and maybe we could see one. So, but the idea is to go out and get some experience and feel for the area. I do not research myself. It's not a full-time hobby for me. I write and read more than I do that. But I love the topic and I can't get enough of it. So my expertise comes from stories and listening, and more as a historian and less as a researcher.
From all of that you've absorbed during this period of time that you've been doing the research, how do you think we're going to prove that these things exist?
That's a great question. And I have my two answers are: one, I don't think we're going to prove it, at least not in the current scenario. And second, but when we do figure out what are real places in this universe, we live in a universe that's billions of galaxies with trillions of stars and planets, and trillions of planets that are livable, that can support life. And I think that we are a small part of a very large universe, and there's a diversity of life and all kinds of things that could have been visiting this planet and should probably have been. And I think when we have a better idea of our place in this universe and the other life that exists in this universe, we will understand that all of a sudden it's like the Bigfoot thing will go, oh yeah, that makes sense now. And the Bigfoot mystery is a small microcosm of a much bigger macrocosm, which is the universe and the nature of the universe and the nature of our place in the universe. And I think that when we understand that part better, the Bigfoot thing will fall right in line. And there won't be any reason to prove it anymore. No one will doubt it.
Do you think the whole UFO exploration and research in that area will fit in then with the Bigfoot?
Oh, I just think they're hand in glove. That's my opinion at the present time. I don't know how to read all these stories coming out now on whistleblowers. I have doubts because I don't think we're getting enough evidence. And I think it might be a distraction. I just have learned not to trust the authorities on these subjects. But I hope at least it's an open door to us starting to find out answers to these issues, because I think it's important. It's very important for us to understand ourselves and who we are in this universe. So I'm hopeful.
Whenever you talk about this, and I have to 100% agree, that all of this phenomena probably is grouped together into something that we don't understand yet. This other kind of world reality, that these things exist, that they have different skill sets than we have, or that reality itself just isn't as basic as we tend to think it is. So let's discuss that, just reality itself, and that maybe we don't have all the facts about that.
If you think of a couple things we do know, and what the implications are, it's pretty staggering. We know, for example, and we didn't until the 30s and 40s, but we know, for example, there's some connection to our seeing photons, our measuring what photons are doing and what the photons do. Just to make it simple, photons become material when we watch them. Before that, they're immaterial, they're light. And there's all kinds of theories about that it's a probability thing, and there's all kinds of factors. And I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to even try that. But there is some fact that they call it the collapse of the wave function, that photons go from being waves, which are more like water, to being solid particles, which are more like solids when we view them, when we examine them. And they call this the measurement problem. That means that there's, to some degree, what we see, Niels Bohr says, famous scientist, what we see is largely composed of things that don't make sense, that we can't see. And I just think that's an amazing discovery that we're just beginning to really honestly look at and examine. And some scientists are avoiding it. Well, most of the quantum physics and quantum mechanics that have done so much to revolutionize our world that we live in technologically are just applied. The principles are applied, while the real big picture implications of the idea of measurement problem is kind of ignored. But I think it's getting harder and harder to ignore. So that's one thing where I think what we see as paranormal could be very, very normal and very scientific if we just understood the science better. And the other thing is entanglement. And entanglement just says if two photons are initially combined in some way, and how that all works, I'm sorry, I'm not a scientist, but at some point and then somehow spread billions of miles apart, that when one changes, the other one will instantly change accordingly because they're opposites. So one changes to a plus, the other one will change to a minus. Instantly from 5 billion miles away, it means that they are violating the law, the speed of light. They're going faster than the speed of light, and nothing's supposed to be able to travel faster than the speed of light. And Einstein actually used that entanglement arguments to argue against some of the discoveries that quantum physicists were making, saying that that wouldn't be possible because it would mean something could travel faster than the speed of light. But quantum physicists have found since that it is exactly possible and things can travel faster than the speed of light. So light is very unusual and very mysterious and does things that we're not supposed to be able to do. And light and everything is composed of light. So with that in mind, I think we shouldn't be so skeptical that some of these things that we're seeing, like potential portals are just the basis, the theoretical basis of portals is entanglement. That somehow you could have two different points separated by billions of miles that could be accessed instantaneously through entanglement. Now, that's an oversimplified layman's explanation, but that's theoretically possible, at least because of the fact that of these new discoveries we have made in the last century. So I just think there's all kinds of possibilities, and we should be careful about discounting things just because we can't prove it, because they're most of the things we can't prove. Most of the energy and the material in the universe that exists, we can't see. It's called dark matter. We only see about 1.5% of what really exists with our human eyes. So there's just a lot of opportunity to learn and grow in the future that will make some of these mysteries make sense. But we're not going to get there if we keep discounting them and imposing purely materialistic answers on everything, in my opinion.
Have you read Ron Moorhead's work on quantum physics regarding Bigfoot?
I have not read it, but I'm going to. That's on my list. I really like Ron, and I think there's a lot of merit to what he said. And I have listened to his tapes on the Bigfoot talking, and I think that's fascinating.
I think he has a real good perspective of this as well. And if it's right in with what you're saying. So, I think that's something he had to come to terms with, because he also, and a lot of people have, because they see the world as such a physical thing. And then these strange things happen to them, and they have to have some kind of process that allows them to understand that this is not normal. Yep. It's not the normal way we perceive reality, but something is happening here. And he used the quantum physics method to understand that.
I was the same place. I came into this thinking this is a physical animal, and we just have to catch it. And even to the point of I was open to the possibility of having one shot if that helped with the discovery. And now I'm completely gone the other direction. I don't want to kill one. I mean, if they're going to kill you, I suppose it's necessary, but I don't want to see one dead, and I don't even care if they solve the mystery. But if this was just a regular animal, it'd be in the zoo. You just can't argue that. and it's not in the zoo, and it's probably not there because it doesn't want to be. And that's not a regular animal. And so there has to be another explanation. And they do exist. There's physical evidence. There's all these sightings. You just can't deny that there's not something to them. And but you can't explain it through normal materialistic means. So there has to be something else.
Exactly. And more, I've done so many of these interviews. I just started doing the interviews about 9 months ago. But in all of the interviews I've done, I mean, you still have the flesh and blood believers out there, of course. And it's not to say that these things aren't a flesh and blood quality to them. And as you said, light turns into, physical form or matter. They're obviously seeing them when they are in matter form, but so many people see them also as, changing form and becoming something that's of light. So I don't think we can discount that completely.
Well, I was reading another book on the phenomena, and one of the things he was proposing is that the light is just the way they actually are, and he proposed that they become a certain image so that we could see them as they are, and because our eyes are trained to look at things in a certain way. And I wonder sometimes too if it's not the opposite way, that our brain, because our brain is just a transmitter. It allows us to see the world. I don't believe we're limited to this body. I believe that we're created as spiritual beings and divine in nature, and that the body is just a way for us to kind of experience three-dimensional reality. That's my opinion. So, and the brain in that setting is just like a transmitter. We receive messages from the invisible and then are able to look, kind of like, what do they call those creatures in the movies where the people would go inside their bodies? And can't remember the name right now. That movie where they're swimming in the water and the other people come to take over them. Anyway, Avatar, remember that? Avatars were, you could go inside their bodies. Well, I think our bodies are like that, and I think that our brains have learned to translate and receive and put things in an image that helps us survive. And so we are seeing what our brain has showed us about reality, that the most efficient way for us to survive as a species, but sometimes that robs us of seeing other things that are there that we can't see. And there are scientists, I've heard them argue that this limits us. It might help us our immediate survival, but it limits us in other ways. And I just wonder if we don't, because that light is something that we should be afraid of, because if we get too close to a wild animal, it can harm us. I wonder if it translates that into the image of this animal to keep us away from it.
Yeah, that reminds me of the work of Donald Hoffman. I don't know if you know who that is.
I have. Yeah,
yes,
I have.
The case against reality. It's like it lays it out in very simplistic terms, very complex idea that lays it out where you can just understand it. He's fabulous at doing that.
Yeah, he's very good. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned him, because I'm going to go do some more research on him.
And I think it's very true. I think we do have a very narrow perspective of the world around us, and most of us only see, these physical things happening. And there are those privileged few that get to see some things, like maybe a Bigfoot that is in the woods, but then it's a light in an orb. And, and it's more and more when I ask people about the orb situation or the light situation around Bigfoot, they've almost always had mutual experiences. Now, there's a lot of flesh and blood researchers out there that say they've never had anyone talk about this. Well, I'm going to inject here that the people I interview would not talk about it either unless I pose the question. But once I pose the question, it gives them that opportunity to talk about that experience as well.
That's right. I mean, people don't want to be laughed at and ridiculed.
No, and this is farther out than seeing a Bigfoot. To see a Bigfoot that turns into an orb, or to have orbs associated with the Bigfoot, is even more beyond normal than to just see an animal in the woods that's a Bigfoot.
Yes, it is beyond normal. And if you're worried about having legitimate scientific research that someone's going to accept on Bigfoot, you might be less likely to listen to that. But I just don't think you can explain this creature in normal ways. Or like I said, we'd have them in a zoo, and we don't. And you wouldn't need to explain them because they'd be in a zoo. So I think that's the only alternative is to look for alternative ways of explaining this reality.
I think
So,
you're right. What else do you have to talk about? Anything that I haven't asked?
well, I'll let you know. I'm looking into an area in Texas called the Big Thicket, which is pretty mysterious area with a lot of different light occurrences and UFO stuff and disappearances. And as the setting for the sequel, and I'm going to focus a little bit on the lights and portals in addition to the Bigfoot creature, who they refer to as the wild man in that area. And that's kind of where the research is heading now. And I'm hoping to have that second one done in a year.